Hello, I'm Robert Knowles.
And I am Richard Simpson.
Today we want to focus on the life of Stalin from before and through World War II. Contrary to popular opinion, Joseph Stalin had a good idea that the war was coming to Europe. He saw the expansion of the German territory by annexing Austria and then the Sudetenland as a threat to the communist Soviet Union. Stalin was well aware of the German government's stance on communism and the German desire to expand to provide more room for the German people. So the goal was to make a treaty with Germany, not to ally with the Soviet Union, but to give the Soviet Union time to prepare for what Stalin knew was coming. While working on a deal with Germany, the Soviet government started preparations for a war that most people knew was going to happen. He was also banking on the fact that the war between Germany and the Anglo-French alliance would allow the Soviet Union, and therefore the communism, to start to dominate Europe. At the same time, trouble had been brewing in the East, as Imperial Japan was working on eliminating China from the world stage. That was getting far too close to Soviet Siberia for the government's liking.
Stalin started to build up of his Red Army, but due to the purges of any he considered a political threat, the troops he was adding were poorly trained and poorly led. Alliances between the Western European nations did not look likely with the Soviet Union, so Stalin looked at Germany as a treaty partner. In his defense, Stalin was approached as if Europe could be divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. Because of the attitudes of the English and French, Stalin replaced his Western-oriented foreign minister, Maxim Litvinov, with Vyacheslav Molotov. This led, in August 1939, to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union. This, in turn, would allow Germany to invade Poland a week later, and of course, the Soviet Union would do the same soon after.
Stalin still used this time to continue to build the industrial and military might of the Soviet Union. Stalin knew that war with Germany was still very likely. But since Germany's war with France and the United Kingdom took attention off the communist nation, now it was a matter of how long Germany would honor a treaty with the Soviet Union. The first treaty between the two nations was followed by another, allowing the Soviet Union and Germany to trade between the two countries. This would include items that Germany would need to continue the war against the UK and France. This despite a blockade of Germany by the UK. The incompetence of the Red Army was brought to full attention with the Soviet invasion of Finland. The Finns were vastly outnumbered, but kept the Soviet army at bay. A temporary peace treaty was signed between Finland and the Soviet Union. At around the same time, the USSR annexed the Baltic nations of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia.
Stalin still believed war was coming, but he wanted to postpone it until he was ready. He went as far as to sign a neutrality pact with Japan, after the latter had joined Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Pact. He even proposed that the Soviet Union join the Axis powers. On 6 May 1941, Stalin claimed the title of Premier of the Soviet Union, making him officially the head of the government for the first time. June 1941 would be a rude awakening for Stalin and his Soviet Union. The Germans invaded, and it didn't go well for the Red Army. The same tactics that led to the surrender of France a year earlier worked well in Belarus, Ukraine, and Western Russia. Within 3 months, the German army was pushing very close to Moscow. Plans were made to move the government to Kuybyshev, but Stalin decided, for the morale of the Red Army, to stay in Moscow. But he would get the Soviet industrial might moved eastward.
Stalin's military plans were against the advice of his generals. He decided to go scorched earth, destroying anything that the Germans might find of use before the army got there. Political prisoners were executed, military commands were gutted, and high-ranking officials were finding themselves lucky if they were just demoted and reassigned. Many are arrested and executed. Stalin considered all Soviet prisoners of war in German lands to be traitors, including his son, Yakov. It was also at this time that all rules of war set forth by the Geneva Conventions were thrown out the window by both nations. Stalin even used anti-Semitism of the Germans to his advantage by using it as a way to get the Jewish groups on his side of the war.
Stalin went against his army commanders by ordering a counteroffensive at Kharkov. The Red Army was decimated in the action. Things turned Stalin's way, sort of, when the German goals changed to southern Russia. This gave him a little breathing room when it came to the status of Moscow, and that led to the battle that would be the turning point of what it was in the USSR called the Great Patriotic War, Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was a very long action. The German army took over the town, but in February 1943, they surrendered. The Red Army took this as the opportunity to start taking the offensive in the war.
Having been allies with the United Kingdom and the United States, talks started between the three powers. Stalin, with his new title of Marshal of the Soviet Union, pushed to have the other allies come into Europe with a new offensive. Stalin chose the location of the meeting of the three in Tehran. Roosevelt and Stalin would get along well. The powers agreed to several things at the meeting. 1, the German state would be broken up. 2, the city of Königsberg would be a Soviet territory after the war. 3, the part of Poland that had been conquered by the USSR would remain as a part of that nation. Churchill, however, opposed that, for the Balkans would be divided into spheres of influence. Greece would go to the west, and the rest would fall under the Soviet dominion. Stalin's distrust of his generals and their aspirations led to many squabbles between the highest ranking officers. He was keen to play them against one another to get the war over with and to see which would consider his biggest rival.
This would come to an end when, in April 1945, Berlin was seized by the Red Army. The Western powers purposely avoided aiming directly for the German capital. When the European war ended, Red Army troops were engaging in atrocious acts against the German civilians, none of which Stalin punished. Then Stalin set his sights on Japan. He knew that if he was going to get any spoils from Asia, he would have to act quickly. The war ended in Japan when the emperor realized that not only would the Americans keep dropping atomic bombs on his nation, but he would also have to deal with the USSR entering the war. Thus ended World War II.
And that brings us to Stalin, part 6, next week. From the end of the war to the end of his life, nearly 8 years later. Join us for that. This has been Robert Knowles.
And I am Richard Simpson. Thank you, and good night.